When was the last time you asked yourself why your students should do their homework? If we don't know, they don't either. Welcome to Math and Higher Ed with Jason Barnett. I'm Jason Barnett, a math professor at South Puget Sound Community College in Washington State. And what this podcast is it's a place for us to talk about math topics in higher education, community college, four-year institutions. And I think it's also going to have applications to other areas that teach math as well. It could be useful for high schools or for other styles of teaching as well. So it's going to be a show with a lot of solo episodes, some interviews with other experts in the field as well. And this podcast is really to help me organize my thoughts, help start some discourse with people across the country in higher education for teaching math, and creating connections between all of us so we can have these important types of discussions about things. Because really, you may have noticed that math in higher education has not really changed much in the last few decades. And our students are wildly different from how they used to be. The world that we live in is wildly different than it used to be. And so we need to be reflecting and adjusting how we are teaching math. So we start with this first episode, which is kind of a two-part episode. And this first episode talks about what is math homework even for? And so I want to start with the question, what do we think the point of homework is? And what should it be? Because if we don't know what we're trying to get out of these homework assignments and we're just making students do homework assignments, the students are not going to know either. And if students don't understand why they're doing something, they're not going to get anywhere near the benefit that they might otherwise get if they do it at all. So we've all heard these common complaints about homework, that it is tedious, it's a waste of time, it's nothing like quizzes or tests. When am I ever going to use any of this stuff, right? Like, most people do not feel like homework is a good use of their time. And yet we do require, most of us, that students complete a lot of homework assignments, that they spend a lot of time on it. And I think a lot of times we're not being very intentional about the time that we're requiring students to spend on it. A lot of times we can get more results out of requiring less if we do it more intentionally and if we think about it a little bit more. So that's what this first episode is really focusing on. So I think some self-reflection is really important, because your answer is going to be different than my answer. When we think about what we as a community think the point of homework is for our students, common answers might include students need to practice skills. They need to know how to, take a derivative, for example. They need to find a derivative. You could also say that, students need to be communicating that they're learning. Okay. Homework is a quick and easy way of students to show that, yes, they did the assignments. They are learning this material in some fashion. Other answers are, we want to know that students are keeping up, that they are, actually engaged in some sense, and that's a good external way of doing that is another common answer, right? There's a lot of different answers for why math professors might ask their students to do homework, and I think we just need to spend some time reflecting as a whole about why we individually want our students to be doing homework, and that's going to help us write homework assignments that are actually meaningful for us and for our students. So the main point, and really we have a few topics in this episode, but the main point that I want to deep dive into is the difference between facilitating learning in homework and having students memorize facts, memorize processes, memorize algorithms. The difference between replicating a solution and understanding the math that can lead someone to solve a problem. And that's really the underlying thing for how homework is taught, right? We traditionally, in our homework assignments, we throw a ton of problems at students. Again, in this example of calculus, of finding a derivative, you give them a whole bunch of problems. Can you find the derivative of all these different functions? And then we get to a quiz or a project or an oral exam, however we're doing any kind of other assessment. And then we act surprised that the students don't actually understand what a derivative is, for example. We've given them a bunch of homework problems. We've given excellent lectures. We've recorded wonderful videos perfectly explaining what a derivative is. But I don't care how much you explain to someone the concepts of a topic. Math is not learned by listening. Math is not learned by watching. Math is learned, really, truly learned, like all skills for most of us, is learned by doing, by forming those own connections in our own heads, by explaining them to someone else a lot of the time, right? There's a lot of ways of learning a topic, and really just listening or watching is one of the worst ways to learn. And so we really need to be using our homework assignments to facilitate that learning, to really make them get those connections. And part of what that's going to look like is productive struggling. If a student is just looking at the problem and then they say, oh, how do I do this? Oh, here's a similar problem. Let's just change. I see, all right, this number is that number. Okay, I can solve this problem. I got the answer. I understand. This is a very common thing. I've seen this all the time. I'm sure you've seen this all the time too, right? And there's nothing, right? There's no learning being done there. There's not even really memorization being done there if they're solving problems like that. And yet it's very tempting for the student to feel like they understand because they got the right answer. So of course they understand, right? And so there's some level of struggle that we need to incorporate into our homework assignments so that students can really be figuring things out in their own minds when they're making their own connections, and that activity of them making their own connections is where the learning is going to happen. That's where the retention is going to be happening when they're building these schema for their long-term memory and so on. And so I think a very important thing for us as educators to include in whenever we're talking about homework assignments, whether we do this in the syllabus, well, the efficacy of a syllabus for communicating policies is maybe a topic for another episode. But whether we do this in the syllabus, whether we talk about this in the homework assignment, whether we harp on it literally every day in class, I think something that we as educators really need to focus on is this idea of productive struggle and communicating that to the students. And the other direction really matters too. If a student is spending 30 minutes on a homework problem, that is not productive struggle. That is struggle, but that's not productive struggle anymore. So I think we should be communicating to students that there is a certain range of time, and that's going to depend on the class. Right? 30 minutes on a differential equations problem is very different from 30 minutes for solving a linear equation. And so of course it definitely depends on the class, but we should give students these ranges and give them norms so that they can kind of know what to expect for, oh, if I'm taking this long, I should ask for help. Okay? Because students only have so much time in the day. And a lot of students, especially depending on who our student populations are, a lot of students have a lot of responsibilities outside of classrooms. And I think we owe it to them to make sure that we're utilizing their time effectively. And part of that is communicating that, no, you don't need to spend 10 hours on my homework assignment. I love that you have the gumption or whatever to do it, but also I would like you to use your time effectively. And so setting boundaries for, hey, if you're spending this much time on a homework problem, just stop and go to the tutoring center, go to office hours, send your professor an email, something. Okay, something needs to change. So that notion of productive struggle is very important too, as an overall concept in our homework assignments. They should have to struggle a little bit, but we should make sure that they're not struggling too much. And another aspect of this topic about the difference between facilitating learning in a homework assignment compared to just memorization or copying of solutions or algorithms it lies in how do we write our problems. So there's a lot of really cool things that we can do with how we write problems. We can tie them into past material, right? As part of scaffolding. We talk more about this in the next episode. For example, if you're doing the definition of a derivative, you can recall rates of change. If you're doing rates of change, you can recall function composition. Function composition also great for introducing the chain rule in calculus, right? There's all these things that tie into past topics that we just assume students, oh, you've learned this. You remember it. You fully understood it the first time, right? But whenever we can tie into past material explicitly, they're like, hey, remember function composition? This is what it did. Here's a little practice. Before we actually have students do a calculus topic, for example, can be very useful. And similarly, tying into future material. A lot of times in more foundational courses, we have students work on skills, and it's like, well, why do we need these skills? And so another very clear example is when we're about to introduce logarithms. Logarithms make no sense to most people. And I think that makes sense. Like, you just see the word log. What the heck does the word log mean? It has a weird subscript. Many of my students don't even know what subscripts are, right? And that's not to shame them, right? It's just that it does not make sense. There is no context for this new thing. So whenever we introduce a topic, whenever we can motivate where it comes from, motivate where it's going, it gives students a framework to put it in. And whenever students have a framework to put this idea, this concept in, then it becomes so much less of just memorization. It becomes so much less of, I'm doing this because Jason said so. It became so much less of, oh, I'm just using this formula. It becomes, oh, this is where this fits in to everything. Whenever the students can see the big picture, math, I'm going on a slight tangent, but teaching math really is like storytelling, right? It's not just thing. It's like, hey, we were here and now we're here. We're building towards this other place, right? And it's all telling a story. And when students can connect different pieces of the story, it's going to help so much with understanding and retention. But again, that's a bit of a tangent for me right here. Okay, so things should definitely tie into past and future material whenever possible. Very important as part of that, right, is to be very explicit about explaining to students what the point is. So in that example that I was trying to build towards when I talked about logarithms is if we have an exponential model, and most students understand that a lot of things grow exponentially. A lot of financial things grow exponentially. A lot of debt grows exponentially in some ways. A lot of populations grow exponentially, right? You can ask them the question of, like, if you have 2 to the x, how long is it going to take for you to get to 10 or something like that, right? And motivate the idea that we have no way of undoing things. You can tie that into the concept of inverse functions, right? Like always tying things into previous things and to future things gives students some level. And I think we do that in our lectures, but I think we also need to explicitly do that in our homework assignments, because as I'm sure is similar for you with this podcast, just because you listen to something doesn't mean you're always fully paying attention to it, doesn't mean you're always going to remember it, doesn't mean you're always taking notes, and that's okay. Our students are the same way. They need to hear the same thing in multiple times, multiple modalities, and homework is a great way to do it. You can put this into a problem, and I'm not saying write like a paragraph of information with every single problem for context, but the things that we're asking the students to do should explicitly call out what they're doing and why they're doing it. But again, that was a bit of a soapbox. We talk more about how to do that in the next episode. This episode's more about the why for homework. Okay, 2 small things for the last part of this discussion about facilitating learning versus memorization is, and it really ties into what I just said, is the fact that knowing why we're doing something helps us do that thing. And I think we can all relate to this as humans, right? Not just as educators, but just as humans. If someone tells me to do something and I don't know why, I may or may not do it. But if they tell me to do something and I know and understand the reason why, it is so incredibly helpful for me to want to do it, for me to do it well, right? And this really ties into self-determination theory, which I don't want to go on too much about, but I've been researching for a grant that I got. And self-determination theory goes in depth about like different ways of motivation and autonomy and how we can really give people control. And when people have control over this, they have a lot more success with it. And I don't want to misquote the theory too much, but self-determination theory and motivation are critical for us to be thinking about, I think, when we are thinking about motivating our students and having them work on things. So that's pretty much it for that topic of facilitating learning versus memorization. Next, we're going to talk about a few they're kind of logistical things, of which we talk more about in the next episode, but some questions that we should really be asking ourselves when we're thinking about what is our homework assignments for. And one of the questions that we should really ask ourselves is, should homework be required at all? Should we give a grade to homework? Should homework be something that students are, quote unquote, forced to do? All right. And that's a question that it's okay regardless of what answer, but we really need to be asking it to ourselves. And I think most of us would probably agree that homework in some form should be available to students, right? That students should have access to homework assignments, whether or not they're required, whether or not they're graded, that giving students the opportunity to practice, giving the students the opportunity to test themselves and gauge their own knowledge, which again, that's another, if you think about the possible reasons to give homework at all, right? That's another thing to add to our list of considerations, is letting students find out, oh, I just listened to this and I said to myself, that makes sense. Does that mean I actually understand it? Because there oftentimes is a disconnect between what students think they understand and what they understand, what students think that they are able to do and what they are able to do. And I think homework is a part of that. And that ties into a topic, again, that we talk more about in the next episode of explicitly having students put away their notes for a homework problem, or try to do something without a calculator for a homework problem. Right, is really trying to get students to be able to self-examine through the use of homework, whether they understand the topic and whether they can actually put something together. So yeah, many people agree that it should be presented to students, but the question is, should we require it or not? And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And one of the obvious advantages to requiring students to do homework is that they're more likely to do it, right? I've done both methods. I've done many methods for homework assignment, required homework assignments, not required homework assignments, somewhat optional homework assignments where if they don't do the homework assignment, then their quiz score for that week is going to fill in their homework score. I've done kind of the opposite as well, where their homework can guarantee them a certain score on their quiz. I've done lots of wild things with homework assignments because it's really quite an interesting part of our math class. But the fact of the matter is, if you require your students to do homework, more of your students are going to do homework. I think it's pretty clear to most of us. Another advantage to requiring homework is that it really gives us another way to assess students that's not based in written examinations. Quizzes and exams, in my opinion, are some of the worst ways of assessing students. They are just expedient ways to assess students. And so I think, a healthy distribution of grading means that not all of our grading is done through written examinations, such as quizzes and tests. That being said, I do still myself use quizzes and tests as a fairly substantial portion of the grade, but I don't think it should be all of the grade. So this gives us another way to do it. Some of the disadvantages, right, that I'm sure you're all aware of to requiring homework is one of them is really that it does decrease motivation, right? When we have to do something, we are less likely to want to do it. And that, again, is also tied to self-determination theory and motivation, feeling that lack of autonomy, that, I'm not choosing to do this homework assignment. And yeah, again, you can read more, listen to, there's a great podcast on self-determination theory as well on Spotify. And yeah, plenty of resources online to read about it as well. And then another disadvantage to requiring students to do their to do homework for points is, I think we as educators should probably want students to practice how to practice. We want that self-reflection. We want that self-evaluation. We want that metacognition of, I understand this material. I'm good. I don't need to waste more time. Or I do not understand this material. I need some more practice. Let us do some more. Or I'm not sure if I understand some more material. Let me, do a couple more problems, right? Like, it's very important that students are able to guide and be aware of their own learning. And I think if we just default to every week you're going to do 20 problems and that's that, then all students of all confidence levels and all styles are going to be more or less doing 20 problems a week. And students should be doing different amounts, right? Not just different students should do different amounts of practice, because different students need different amount of practice, but each week, right? Students will need a different amount of practice than a different week. Some weeks this makes sense. I don't want my students to waste their time practicing something that they already understand. I also don't want my students wasting their time not practicing something that they need to practice. And I think whenever we require homework assignments, we give up a lot of that flexibility, which again, that flexibility does need to be taught. We can't just expect our students to walk into our classes and know exactly how much and how they need to practice, right? That's part of teaching. We are far past the age where professors are required to disseminate information, right? We don't need professors for that. All the information we're teaching, at least in undergrad, and probably for a lot of graduate level courses as well, all that information is accessible for free on the internet, okay? We are far, far, far past, many, many decades past the time where having a professor was required to get the information from. And our roles as professors are consequently evolving, or they should be evolving to be teaching a lot more, providing structure to students, providing motivation for students. And again, internal versus external motivation, right? There's a lot to say about that. Providing boundaries for students, providing feedback and conversation for students, right? There's a lot of things that we offer, but I think our main role is certainly not just sharing the information anymore. And so that again ties to the disadvantage for requiring homework, in that we want to be teaching students how to practice and how much to practice, and that own self-reflection. And then the last disadvantage I want to talk about for requiring a homework assignment is essentially equity, right? If we are having students do very long homework assignments outside of class, that's going to affect some students a lot more than others. Some students have a lot less time outside of class than others, and a lot more responsibility. Some students, right, have people that can help them outside of class more with homework. And it's very easy and it's very tempting, and I myself have done this a lot of times, of just saying, well, they should have known how much time they're going to need when they sign up for this class, right? And that's very easy to say from a place of privilege, but we also need to recognize and support our students and set them up for success how they will. And this also is tied to what I mentioned earlier about giving framework or boundaries about how long students should be spending on each individual problem, and really encouraging them to get help. I've, as just like a personal anecdote, I've really noticed that most of my students who spend the most time and like wasting the most time are a lot of times the students who have the least time, because they know they need to pass. They know they need to understand it. So they're going to sacrifice a lot of things in their personal life to spend 10 hours on a homework assignment that I do not want them to spend 10 hours on. So that is tied to the equity piece as well. Okay, and then I want to end this subsection on requiring homework with a thought that is really kind of still in the start for me. And that's like that it's not binary. It's not a binary choice to require homework or not require homework. There's a lot of room for flexibility. There's a lot of fun, creative, innovative things that we can do. Something that I'm experimenting with right now that I don't have enough data on to say whether it's a good idea or not is we can require students to complete homework assignment, but we can also give them autonomy on how much of that homework assignment to complete. We can offer various rewards if we're into rewards. There are, again, some pros and cons to offering those types of rewards as well. But I think there is definitely a world where we have semi-optional homework. There's a lot of things to do with that, but I'll let you brainstorm those. So the last thing I want to talk about on this episode is how should homework be graded? Because, of course, many professors do not have TAs. Many professors do not have graders in their classes. And so for most of us, we have the choice of, do we want to grade the homework? Do we want someone else to grade the homework? Do we want a computer to grade the homework? You can consider the idea of peer grading, which has a lot of advantages. I have not delved into this myself, but having peers grade other peers' homework assignments can, increase communication and connections in the classroom, make students feel less isolated. It can let students see how other students are doing math. Seeing different perspectives, different points of views, a lot of advantages to peer grading. We can have online grading. I'll talk more about the difference between paper homework and online homework and like pros and cons of each of those in the next episode. But that's definitely something to consider as well. You could also consider whether you want to grade on correctness. Do you want to be grading individual problems, making sure that they're correct? Do you want to grade on completion for your homework assignments? Again, pros and cons to both. But that is definitely something that we should be considering when we're thinking about homework assignments. That's pretty much it for this first episode on what is math homework even for. The next episode, we talk about designing math homework that actually works. So looking forward to hearing any feedback that you have. Please feel free to leave a comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Feel free to contact me online. Jason Barnett, math professor, is going to get you there. I work at South Puget Sound Community College. I would love to hear any of your thoughts or feedback about homework, about the podcast, about any things that you have tried as well, and we can maybe show those out in a future episode. And then I would like to close by saying that if you found this podcast interesting or valuable, or if it got you thinking at all, I would highly encourage you to share this podcast with other people, other educators, or or even students, right? Getting the student perspective on education is really valuable as well. So if you found this valuable, please share it, send it along. So we can get more conversation about these topics and really tie it all together and make those connections among math educators, but as well among our students and other people in the community. So thank you everyone for listening, and until next time.